Good evening, everybody. Hey, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. Well, apologize for the late start. We had a little IT issue, and we believe the IT issue has been resolved so that our friends that are listening to us and viewing us from live stream, the camera's right up there, that they will be able to see and hear us. So welcome to Transfiguration, and thank you very much for making tonight. I know you're very busy, and I appreciate you making tonight part of Catholic social teaching. I want to go over a little bit about the parts of tonight's talk on faithful citizenship. The first part of the talk will be on what moral principles that a Catholic should consider reviewing based upon statements that some of the candidates may speak to. And we are also going to be talking about the spiritual foundations of these moral principles that will be discussed. The second part, we'll talk about the spectrum of prudential conscience and how Catholics should be informed and why it is important for everyone to form their own individual conscience. Each part will be about 30 minutes in duration, half of which will be the presentation and half of which will be the Q&A. Now let's talk about the Q&A. From the live stream audience, you can send your questions to cst@transfiguration.com. CST is abbreviation for Catholic Social Teaching. From the sanctuary here, we have ushers that will be giving you index cards, and you'll just have to raise your hand, and they'll give you the index card, and then you give them the index card back, and it will come to me eventually, and I'll ask the speaker. Now, for those of you that are here, if you have an active cell phone, you too can send your questions to cst@transfiguration.com. A handout to be used as a reference for the moral principles section was provided to each of you as you came in the door, and it was uploaded to those that are listening to us remotely. Now, it's important to note that we will not be endorsing, I repeat, not be endorsing or opposing any candidate tonight, as voting is a personal decision that each of us needs to make. The whole point of tonight is to kind of give you a paradigm as to how to think through that process. Also given to each of you was a single white page that says a prayer to the Creator, and I'm going to use that as our opening prayer. For those of you who are live streaming, that was uploaded to the site also. This prayer comes from, excerpt from Pope Francis's most recent encyclical entitled Fratelli Tutti, that came out just a week ago about. So I would encourage you to speak softly the words as I do. A prayer to the Creator. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Tom Reichert. Tom has worked for the church since the early 1980s in various capacities, to include teacher, justice coordinator, outreach, and pastoral minister, just to name a few. Tom has studied a year at St. Meinrad Seminary. He has a master's degree in international peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, focusing on Catholic teaching. Tom?
Well, I really wish we could have the roundtable discussions like we've had in the past, because there's more wisdom out here than there is here. Generally, we get a chance to discuss these issues and work it out and get the collective wisdom together. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to think about something. If you were the head of the Catholic Conference of Bishops, what would be the most important issue in this election? What are the greatest injustices to our country and the world? What are the greatest threats to humanity? And if you'd like, write that down, and Chris will record that, and we'll see what we come up with, because I want to get as much input from you as well. And also, as we go, any questions, please write those down as well. Hello out there, folks. Good to see you, Larry. Glad to see you came, buddy. And so my talk isn't concerned about your vote. It relates more to our soul. We're here in the church tonight to do something holy. What we're about is putting our heads together to see how we can transform society where we can more fully respect dignity and liberty for all. One time when I was at Sacred Heart, we took a medical team to Haiti, and for the first couple of years, the medical clinic was in the church. And so in that church, there were babies being born. I remember the very first medical delegation was surrounded by thousands of folks. And the only way people could get in was to bring the stretchers through the window. So that would be the church as the field hospital, where you literally save lives. Tonight, we're called to infuse a Christian spirit into the mentality, laws, and structures of our country, of society. To the degree we do so, we save lives. Justice is the aim of all politics. We're all struggling to provide liberty and justice for all. Pope Paul VI says that justice is the minimal condition of love. I couldn't love Usha if I didn't at least treat her in a just way. We just can't do that. So that's what we're about tonight. Every person in the entire world is made in the image and likeness of God. Every person in the entire world has basic human rights, basic human dignity, and we all have basic duties. John the 23rd teaches that each of us has a right to life, liberty, and the means to suitable for proper development of life. These are primarily food, clothing, shelter, rest, medical care, and finally the necessary social services. In the political domain, this is the way we protect basic human dignity, including the least of these. The church teaches that forms of social or cultural discrimination in basic personal rights on grounds of sex, race, color, social condition, language, or religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design. So basically, racism, sexism, religious intolerance has nothing to do with the ways of God or the will of God. Everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight relates to family, because for foremost, we're one human family. Everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight relates to healing, because we're all hurting, broken, suffering. Everything I'm going to talk to you tonight relates to mutual liberation, because when we do what's right, not only do we help someone to secure their dignity, we find our own fulfillment. We already know the teachings, the basic principles of Catholic social teaching. If you haven't read this, you can get it. And so I'm not going to go that route. Last election, we did go that route. I'm going to go a different route. October 3rd, Francis just issued his new encyclical, Brothers All. If you get a chance to read that, read all the social teaching that you can if you want to see the mind of the church. The church, which is you and I, is called to represent the person and teachings of Jesus. I could care less if you label me a liberal. I could care less if you label me a conservative. My first allegiance is try to be Christian. And if we want to transform society, we must first have a spiritual transformation. So take a look at that picture of St. Francis for a moment. He's the inspiration for the Pope's last two encyclicals. Francis was a rich person who became poor and embraced Lady Poverty. He was someone who was a soldier who embraced nonviolence. He was someone that sensed inner being with all of creation, brother, sun, sister, moon, and all of life. Here, who's the Christ figure in that picture? He'll kiss the leper, won't he? And what does he find out? That's the Christ figure. So there's the spiritual transformation that we're talking about. If we want to be born again and see anew with a new set of eyes, follow that guy, the Good Shepherd, where he seeks out the lost and the least of these. Because only in relationship do we really find transformation. So that's where we're called to embrace a culture of encounter, accompaniment, and empowerment. So that's what we want to do as Christians. So compare the story of the Good Samaritan with the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. The Good Samaritan enters into relationship with the person who gets beat up along the road. The rich person doesn't do anything. He just doesn't enter into relation. He doesn't even acknowledge Lazarus' presence. And he ended up in hell because of it. He couldn't see the other as another self. It wasn't his business. In the last 100 years, the world's added 5 billion people. 20 years ago, Pope John Paul II stated, "The poverty of billions of men and women is the one issue that most challenges our human and Christian consciences. We cannot but embrace the immense multitudes of the hungry, the needy, the homeless, and those without medical care. To ignore them would mean becoming like the rich man who pretended not to know the beggar Lazarus lying at his gate." 2 years ago, we took a building team down to Guatemala. Lazaro back there in the corner was one of the guys that went with me, and after the building team, we went to Mexico City to bring supplies to a group of maybe 800 or so asylum seekers. People leaving their world, the only world they knew behind. People seeking sanctuary, risking their lives for sanctuary that they're not going to find. Here we find Christ in the distressing disguise of the stranger, the hungry, the thirsty, and the sick all at once. So Tom's not going to be riding back on the top of trains trying to get to border in the back of trucks or walking across the desert trying to get to the border town. Tom's going to get in his plane and fly home to his country that he happened to be born in. So where's the transformation? I'm the rich guy. I'm the rich guy in the parable, aren't I? So you start to see with a new set of eyes. Should the church speak out for comprehensive immigration or separating children from their parents? What does it mean to put America first? Should my country, the richest country in the world, provide aid for development and basic human needs? What does it mean to make America great? Vatican II states, "Let us not be guilty of the scandal of having some nations, most of whose citizens bear the name Christian, enjoying the abundance of riches, while others lack the necessities of life and are tortured by hunger, sometime and said, "What must I do to be saved?" And Jesus said, "You must be born again. Your whole new way of seeing must change. Your being must change." When Dr. King spoke about the triple evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism, he recalled this gospel story and he said, "America, you must be born again to a new way of seeing, a new way of being, to a new set of laws that allow for integration, where respect for human dignity for the whole person and all people happens." Keep in mind, when Dr. King worked to dismantle structures of systemic racism, he did as much to liberate white people from the sin of racism as he did to liberate black people from the sin of racism, because in the end, God is just. Because we reap what we sow, because many who are last will be first, because what we do to the least of these, we do unto Christ. So all liberation is mutual liberation. All the political problems we struggle with, such as war, terrorism, abortion, poverty, climate change, racism, sexism, are first and foremost moral and spiritual problems. Archbishop Romero says the church must cry out. It takes its spittle on its face, its lashes on its back, its cross in its passion, all that human beings suffer. There is no dichotomy between man's image and the image of God. Pope Benedict writes, "Charity, love, must animate the entire lives of the lay faithful, and therefore also their political life. We need to be convinced that charity is a principle not only of micro relationships with friends, family members, and small groups, but also macro relationships, social, economic, and political." Let me develop one point before we go to questions. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth will set us free." In his encyclical Charity and Truth, Pope Benedict writes, "Without truth, without trust, and love for what is true, there is no social conscience." Let me repeat that. Without truth, without trust and love for what is true, there is no social conscience. But what is truth? People tend to make up and believe whatever narrative they want to believe. Behind every form of oppression or human rights atrocity, you will find overt propaganda and dehumanizing lies. When the babies were stabbed in the mother's womb in Guatemala during the genocide, those babies were called seeds of communists. The Holocaust, arguably the worst human rights nightmare in history, was based on a lie. In his encyclical Brothers to All, Pope Francis states, "The Holocaust must not be forgotten. It's the enduring symbol of the depths to which human evil can sink, spurred by false ideologies. Nor must we forget the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's easy to say that all these things happened long ago and we should look into the future. For God's sake, no. We need to keep alive the flame of collective conscience, bearing witness to succeeding generations to the horror of what happened." What did happen? In 1933, a white supremacist leader in Germany wanted to restore his country to power and began scapegoating Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies for being the reason Germany lost World War I. Jews, whom many Christians already scapegoated for being Christ killers. By the time World War II ended, 400,000 American soldiers lay dead. In 1943, William Langer worked for the United States Office of Strategic Services, submitted an analysis of how Adolf Hitler held such sway over the German people, and he writes, "His primary rules were, never allow the public to cool off, never admit a fault or wrong, never concede that there may be good in your enemy, never leave room for alternatives, never accept blame, concentrate on one enemy at a time, blame him for everything that goes wrong. People will believe a big lie sooner than a little one, and if you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later come to believe it." This is the utter antithesis of Christianity. By the end of World War II, 6 million Jews died and 70 to 80 million people lay dead. If we want to build a culture of life in the present, we have to learn from the past. If we believe a false narrative, we'll do horrible things. If we believe the narrative that Jesus was possessed and that Jesus cast out devils by the devil, that he was a liar, we might well crucify Jesus. If we embrace conspiracy theories like QAnon, we have more in common with the Prince of Lies than we do Jesus. If we believe false narratives about COVID during this pandemic, people die. If we believe false narratives about global warming and climate change, people die. If we believe that false narrative that the child in the womb is simply a cluster of cells which can simply be removed like a tumor, people die. In fact, some 50 million babies are aborted in the world each year. What does this say about the world? What does Jesus, our nonviolent Savior, have to say about this? Whatever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. It's been said the one thing necessary for evil to flourish, for good people to do nothing. As Catholic, our first allegiance is not to our political party. Our first allegiance is to the love of God and neighbor. Our first allegiance is to the truth. Our first allegiance is to work for liberty and justice for all, not only for our country, but all the world. The United States is called to be a beacon of hope and a champion of human rights to the world. So like Jesus, we're called to heal the world, to be a leaven to cultivate a culture of life and a civilization of love, to cooperate with the will of God, that the reign of God might come more fully on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you. Now we've got some questions, and I'm going to step back just.
Ronnie, would you be so kind? So you have index cards already. I don't know if you wrote anything that Tom asked you earlier, but the index cards are also for questions. Please give the index cards to this lovely lady, and we'll continue. I did get a question that I'm going to ask Tom now, waiting for the rest to come. Archbishop Hartmeyer, in his Faithful Citizenship document, said that the teaching which is the highest priority for the church is teaching respect and protection of life from the first moment of conception to natural death. Tom, how does this fit into your scriptural foundations?
Well, largely because of what we just talked about, that all people have a sacred dignity and that no one can forfeit that dignity. You'll also notice that's extended in this pastoral that was just released, Brothers All, to people on death row. They still have human dignity, and so you hear the Pope speaking against the death penalty for that same reason. And it doesn't matter who we are or where we are, God loves us. And God's pulling for us, even the good thief on the cross. So I think the bishop's on to something.
I think that's a very safe thing to say. The next question is, we hear a lot about racism and protesters. What about looters and law enforcement?
Good question. Excellent. Everybody get that question? So this is another, sometimes people get a false narrative about the church on this. So if you look at the church believes that peace is the fruit of a just order. And so we have to have just laws if we're going to live together. And if you have just laws, those laws have to be enforced. And who does that? Law enforcement, who protect and serve. So they're doing us a tremendous service. I was at an interfaith prayer gathering the other day, and one of the people there was a police officer from Cobb County, and he was talking about, the training that is involved, the work that's involved, the risks you get put to, the danger you must face. And so when I had a chance to speak, I made the point that, it's interesting because every Christian has to be willing to take the same risk as that law enforcement officer. Isn't that interesting? And think about this. He said when George Floyd got his neck nailed on, every police officer that he knew cringed because it makes, it makes it tougher for them. It undermines who they are. And so, the church obviously is for peaceful protest. We participate in peaceful protest. We have a duty to. The church does not believe in violent protest or looting. And the church does not believe in police brutality. And so that's the tension.
We've heard a lot of thoughts here, and I would welcome your participation by filling out an index card and getting the question to us. The next one, Tom, is do you believe that being a fundamentalist Christian creates hate or fear among the American people?
I think blind belief in anything gets people killed. You can see it in the super patriot that just my country, love it or leave it. With religious fundamentalism, sometimes that manifests itself into terrorism, violence. And the other thing about it, think about this. If I'm talking to you and I say I go to another country, there's a difference between proselytizing and evangelizing. Proselytizing, if I was trying to proselytize Monsignor Walsh, proselytizing means that I know something he doesn't know, that I somehow have something he doesn't have, and he might be of a different religion. So you're not entering as an equal in a mutual interaction where we learn from each other. And I think that's one of the real dangers of religious fundamentalism. And sometimes, if you look at our history, matter of fact, Francis, following the footsteps of John Paul II, goes to Assisi. And what does he do with other religious leaders? He says, violence cannot be done in the name of God. And whether it's Judaism, Islamic, Christian, it can't be, but oftentimes it is, isn't it? And then all of a sudden you have the Savior, in our case Jesus, who didn't even embrace violence, who never used violence in his life to defend himself. People are fighting and killing for his religion. Well, what would he say to us? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Why did they go to Assisi? Because that's what Francis did. Francis went to the Sultan, the Islamic leader, and after they had their interaction, he liked Francis. Because Francis wasn't coming for power or glory. He truly was a seeker, a religious seeker. And kindred spirits recognize kindred spirits.
So the topic of faithful citizenship, as we've heard, covers many areas. But at the end of the day, it focuses on preparing yourself that when you walk into that voting booth, that when you vote through your own conscience, that you'll do it with alignment with Christian values. Next question, Tom. The American bishops said abortion was the preeminent concern, in quotes. But Pope Francis puts abortion into the context of other concerns. How do we as voters balance that?
Well, Kat's going to help us on part of this question. But I will say this. Every one of these issues is interrelated. Every one of them is. You saw how Dr. King says, I've come too long to segregate, I've worked too long against segregation to segregate my moral concerns. So when we went to Haiti, we've had people that gave us kids, that wanted us to take their child. And the reason they did, it wasn't because they didn't love their child. That's what's the heartbreaking thing about it. You know, so we talked about the teeming population and the poverty and what have you. Well, it's a lot easier to bring a child into the world if you can care for the child. So by embracing development, you give incentives for people to do the right thing. And many times, if you go to Guatemala as an example, one of the big issues we found down there was domestic violence. And guys basically have their way with the women. And what are the women? There's no safe houses. There's nowhere to go. You don't own any land. So what happens to the woman in that situation? And then you have the same issue. How do you raise the child? So I think that Pope Francis and the Catholic view is you try to do all. And he calls it, the church calls it, an integral Christian humanism. Or we could, sometimes you've heard a consistent life ethic. That we're going to want to work on all tiers if we want to solve these problems. You know, so Kat will have to speak about how to make prudential decisions on that. I will say this. If you look at Pope Francis, you will hear him say when he talks about climate change that doomsday predictions can no longer be met with irony or disdain. The pace of consumption, waste, and environmental change has so stretched the planet's capacity that our contemporary lifestyles, unsustainable as it is, can only precipitate catastrophes. And we're seeing them right now. And the poor people see them much more than we do. You also heard in 1983, where the bishops addressed the Cold War, that this is the worst menace the human race has ever faced. And John Paul II said survival now is only by conscious choice. So you have Francis, when he goes to Hiroshima the last time, he says not only is it immoral to use nuclear weapons, it's immoral to threaten to use them or to possess them. And here again, you go back to the culture of encounter. If you want to know why that is, talk to survivors. Literally, I read that John Hersey book about that, and what happened, you're looking at the face of evil. Literally, when that bomb went off, people's eyes melted. You know? And so our task, really, isn't it, is to see with the eyes of Christ. What would Christ have us do? Is there a way we can form coalitions and treaties and understandings throughout the world where we can respect the basic dignity of all, where we solve our problems nonviolently? In this last encyclical, he cited 3 inspirations besides St. Francis. Dr. King from Atlanta, Georgia, Mahatma Gandhi, and Desmond Tutu. All of them embraced nonviolence for social transformation, because that's what Jesus did too, right? So that's a thought.
Okay, we got a couple more questions here. This is the fast that pleases me, to release those bound unjustly, to let the oppressed go free, Isaiah 61. We used to say this prayer at Lent. Where are our church leaders? Caged children, locked up black men? The person who wrote the question ends it there, but would you comment on that?
Well, yeah. I think I know where that question is going. So, ask yourself this question. How often do you hear Catholic social teaching integrated into the homily or to the liturgy? And ask yourself this question. We hear about abortion quite a bit. Everybody knows the church is teaching on that. But why don't we bring up capital punishment or putting people in cages or racism or, you know, some priests won't even speak to the issue of racism. Why don't we? I know why. Because people get upset at you if you do it. They say you're bringing politics into the church. They don't say that with abortion, but they'll say it with all these other issues. When really, fundamentally, what is it? It's defending basic human dignity. And then, in defense of the priests, if you look here, they have all the sacramental things. They have people calling all this. They're running staffs. They have a business. They're going here, going there. It's very difficult sometimes to ever get to Catholic social teaching. Very difficult to do it, and it takes a prophetic spirit to do it. One of the things we fail to realize sometimes is that Jesus was a prophet. Isaiah was a prophet. Archbishop Romero said, look, by our baptism, we're all called to be prophets. They used to make fun of him for being a prophet. And he said, good, you should be one too. But what's the price a prophet pays? He got shot down saying Mass at the altar. Dr. King got shot down. Jesus got taken down. Gandhi got taken down. So why don't people like to talk about it? That's part of the reason.
All right, this is our last question on this segment, and I'm going to hold over a couple other questions for the next segment because I think it's appropriate there too. I'll start over again. Individual transformation is important. Additionally, in our larger communal relationship known in social science as the marketplace of ideas, how do we advance the truth of justice as we understand it?
I'm not sure I get that totally, but I'm going to run with it in one way. So right now we're in a pandemic. And we realize how intrinsically social human beings are. All you people out there, all you people that could be here, all the people that have died. Human beings are fragile and we're intrinsically social. But take the pandemic for a second. I want to read something Pope Francis wrote. A small virus continues to cause deep wounds and to expose our physical, social, and spiritual vulnerabilities. It has laid bare the great inequality that reigns in the world, inequality of opportunity, inequality of goods, inequality of access to health care, inequality of technology, education, and so the list goes on. This is the important part. These injustices are neither natural nor inevitable. We must not find a cure not only for the coronavirus, which is important, but also for the great human, social, economic viruses, also for the virus of racism, also for the virus of sexism, also for the virus of indifference in the face of great human suffering. And so what Francis does is he sits there and says, okay, look, I can take a tangible here and I can point to a spiritual truth there. He says when we come back from this pandemic, we don't want to go back to the way things were. We want to bring the reign of God on earth as it is in heaven. We want to improve it. Now we see real clear that we've got real problems. And so sometimes when something happens to us, I do a bereavement group. When we do a bereavement group, when you lose a loved one that you've been married to for 40 years, half of you dies. And to get through that grief and that struggle, the only thing you can do is to forge a new identity, which goes right back to being born again, or born anew, or born from above. And it's very difficult to do, but there's an opportunity for it. And he's trying to help us see this time as an opportunity for that. So again, I apologize that we don't have tables and round table discussions and we can really learn from each other and share in discourse, because that's where the transformation happens. But, we did the best we could, and thanks for coming there, folks.
Can we show Tom a sense of appreciation, please? If you reflect, both Kat and Tom, this is a challenging topic, and both have done a lot of effort and work and review of articles and other aspects in order to prepare for tonight. Okay, our next speaker is Kat Doyle. Kat is a director of Justice and Peace Ministry for the Archdiocese of Atlanta. Sounds rather straightforward, doesn't it? Well, it is a straightforward job, but she is an extremely, very busy woman, helping all of us, including the people sitting here and out there, in the diocese, to better understand the Catholic perspective on contemporary issues like human trafficking, racism, death penalty, climate change, to name a few. And, oh, by the way, faithful citizenship also. Kat?
Good evening. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm going to build a little bit on what you heard from Tom. He talked about loving your neighbor. And I want to talk to you about, if you love your neighbor, then I want you to see voting as an act of love. So let me put that in a little bit of perspective for you. The U.S. Bishop's document, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, tells us that in the Catholic tradition, responsible citizenship is a virtue, and participation in political life is a moral obligation. San Diego Bishop Robert McElroy said in his talk on February 7th, Conscious, Candidates, and Discipleship in Voting, that it is primarily through the votes of Catholic men and women, rooted in conscience and in faith, that the Church enters into the just ordering of society and the state. And it is primarily in voting for specific candidates for office that believers as citizens have the greatest opportunity to leave the earth a better place than we found it. That's love. So if I'm Catholic, how do I decide how to vote or who to vote for? I want to start with conscience. Because if we're forming conscience for faithful citizenship, let's make sure we're kind of all on the same page for that. Conscience, the most secret core and sanctuary of a person. There he or she is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his or her depths. A sanctuary, the conscience, a place where you and God have a relationship. And according to Catechism, a human being must always obey the certain judgment of his or her conscience. That's a pretty big ask. We have to enter into that relationship with God and always obey what it is, that voice of God that we're hearing. I don't even always know what that means. I think there are probably a lot of people that struggle with that. And so tonight is going to be part of that lifelong education. And for some, this may be a review. For others, this may be brand new information that you're getting. But education and the education of the conscience is a lifelong task. It's never done. It's never complete. And as new situations arise and new issues confront us, it requires us to delve back into that conscience, into that relationship with God, and mull those things over and discern those things and really take what God is saying to us and put it into the action of voting. So Catholic scholar Bretsky says in his book, A Morally Complex World, that there are 4 sectors of sources of moral theology. They come from experience, from reason, from scripture, and from tradition. And the U.S. bishops say in Forming Conscience for Faithful Citizenship that the process of conscience formation includes approaching issues with an openness to seek the truth, Tom talked to us about that seeking the truth. We have to be open to seeking the truth, and our conscience informing it helps us do that. We have to study sacred scripture and the teachings of the church. These aren't just things that are there that are nice. These are things we need to study. There's some work we have to do. We also examine the facts and background information. That's the reason. And we engage in prayerful reflection. So rather than just focus on a candidate or an issue, another way to look at voting as an act of love is to look at it through the lens of values. Now, this might be a little bit different than maybe where you've gone or what you've heard before. Values are these abstract ideals or ideas about what is desirable, what is good, and what is bad. And the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Catholic Church says essentially these values are truth, freedom, justice, and love. And Pope Francis reminds us that as an authentic faith, it always involves a deep desire to change the world, to transmit values. So the questions, when we asked Tom earlier, how do we do some of these things? One of these things is to know what are those values that we as Catholics take with us into the voting booth? Truth, freedom, justice, and love. In Calvin's Laws Virtues, we learn that there are actually two approaches to values. The first is this layered or lexically ordered. So what that means is the first or fundamental level has to be met and secured completely before we can turn to the second, and so on. But there's another, and it's an intricately herringbone pattern that must all be integrated tightly into a pattern so that the wall will stand upright. And once again, Pope Francis reminds us that it can't be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. And so as Catholics, we know with our faith, and especially when we're working in a world where we aren't the only people out there, there are people of other faiths and other beliefs, and that we have to integrate and be a part of the reality of the world today. So that herringbone approach, that layered approach, is one that we have to take into consideration as we're looking at how we form our consciences to vote. Voting discernment considers how to promote interconnected values. And I'm not here to tell you all how to vote. You've probably heard it before, and many of you have probably heard it from me, that the church doesn't take a stand for or against any candidate, but speaks out on issues for or against them. And as frustrating as it might be for many of us, the bishops don't take a public stand on every social issue. So we have to do some work. We have to learn what the church teaches and why the church teaches, as well as to prayerfully discern our understanding and interpretation of the issue and the church's teaching, that woven, interlayered ideal. But in the end, Bishop McElroy reminds us, voting supports candidates, not issues. And voting discernment considers how those candidates will promote or undermine our interconnected values. Let's look at these considerations that come directly from Calvin's Law Virtues. Competence. Does the candidate have the intellectual capacity, the experience, the temperament, and the judgment to do the job? Character. Does the candidate have a good set of moral values and the integrity to pursue them in situations of temptation or fear? Collaboration. Can the candidate work well with other people, both political allies and opponents? And connections. What are the candidate's party affiliations, affiliation with lobbyists, corporate entities, and individual donors? Discernment of interconnected values requires discernment of interconnected issues. These things indicate how likely a candidate will be to promote or undermine our values. The threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority. We just heard this. This is from the USCCB. And this statement alone is issue-based, not candidate-based or interconnected values-based. As Catholics, we're not single-issue voters. Our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate, for at stake is the dignity of a human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development. Equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, the underprivileged, the vulnerable, the infirm, the elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, the new forms of slavery, and I can go on and on. Some Catholics consider migration a secondary issue compared to the grave bioethical questions. A politician looking for votes might say such a thing is understandable, but not to a Christian. We have to discern what are our values as they lay on top of those issues. Prudential judgment. This came up, and I'm literally putting a full course into 15 minutes this evening. But when we look at prudential judgment, it owes serious consideration when Catholics are forming their views. Prudential judgment is using prudence, the virtue of prudence, when making decisions. That means that we have to consider all the issues, all the values, all the things going on, and that's not easy. But we're called to do it. And God gives us the ability to do that by reminding us, come and talk to me. Meet me in the sacred place of your conscience. Meet me there where we can do things. So when voting, we have two duties: opposing evil and doing good as essential obligations. But we also have two temptations: the moral equivalence that makes no ethical distinction between the different kinds of issues involving human life and dignity, and the misuse of the necessary moral distinctions as a way to dismiss or ignore other serious threats to human life and dignity. So I want to finish up, and then we're going to take some questions here with the idea of cooperating with evil, because this comes up a lot. And we have to remember that if values transcend issues, we need to know what it means when we're cooperating with evil. Formal cooperation is one acts foreseeing and intending to advance the evil of another, and it's never permissible. Material cooperation, one foresees but does not intend that his or her action will advance the evil of another. And it is permissible under certain circumstances. In fact, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger said in the Vatican U.S. Bishops on Catholic and Political Life, when a Catholic does not share a candidate's stand in favor of abortion or euthanasia, but votes for that candidate for other reasons, it is considered remote material cooperation, which can be permitted in the presence of proportionate reasons. That means we have to take the time to say, what is the outcome of that vote? If we're voting for somebody who goes against one of our sacredly held values, is there good that will come out of that? And it comes back to kind of double indemnity here, is that what are you pursuing, the good or the bad? If I'm not voting for the candidate who supports abortion, but I'm voting for that candidate because they can do other things that I believe and my conscience has told me is more doable, then my conscience tells me that that is permissible, and the church says so. Conscience, prudential assessment of how candidates will impact interconnected values that transcend issues is part of forming and informing our consciences. So 2 things here. Catholic people of goodwill and strong conviction, having formed and informed their conscience based on sound church teaching and prudential judgment, can still come to different conclusions and vote differently. That doesn't make them bad Catholics, and it doesn't make them bad people. And that brings me to the second point. We have to be merciful in our disagreements. The USCCB calls on Catholics to read and follow the Civilize It campaign. We must not let our passionate faith drive a wedge between us and those people who have different views than we do. We cannot let them divide us. We must be willing to listen to those who have discerned yet come to different conclusions. We must be willing to share our thoughts without fear or hatred and contempt, and be willing to further discern and engage in lifelong catechesis as we make our way through life in preparation for the kingdom.
Okay, one of the questions that I got in the last section, and please, if you have any comments about what Kat says, if you need a postcard, please, an index card, please let us know. This question is, there are virtually no candidates who fully reflect the principles of Catholic social teaching. Can you address the process you use to evaluate candidates to select a choice? Now, I know you went into that for about 15 minutes, but could you do it again in a more abbreviated fashion? Oops.
First of all, what I've talked to you about tonight is not my opinion. This is church teaching. This is things that have been published by scholars, by theologians, by our bishops, by the Pope. These are things that I give great thanks to Dan DeLeo at Cretan University, who did a lot of this research for me and came up with a lot of this information for me. But here's what it comes down to. When we're using prudential judgment, we're forming our conscience, we can take whoever the candidates are that we are going to look at to vote for, knowing full well that none of them meet all of our criteria and believe in and support all of our values. So two things happen. One is we look at life through the lens of our own lived experiences. I don't know what other people have experienced and haven't shared with me. So when I'm looking at what a candidate does well or promises he or she will do, and I look at their character to follow through, I can only go on either what I know or what I've learned. And with what I've learned, I have to use prudential judgment to make sure that that is good information. That's that formation and information of conscience. So you take the candidates, you take where they stand on those views, and you begin to overlay your values. Those things that are important to you. Here's the second part of that. We all have passions. And we all have individual passions, things that are so very important to us that sometimes it causes those things to rise and be the most important thing that we're going to look at in a candidate. Prudential judgment says, be careful. Make sure that what you're passionate about is really what brings about the good, the common good of all. Make sure that what you're passionate about is also something that supports your Catholic values. If you've looked at that, then you can take that passion and begin to see who's going to do what they said they will do, who has a history of doing what they said they will do. Who has been willing to stand up and say, this is what I support, and then act on it? So when we are discerning who the best candidate is to vote for, first look at what our values are, look at what we know, what we've learned, and that's all we have. We cannot expect people who have not experienced what we've experienced to go through this candidate vetting process the same way we do. It is an individual thing, and that's where conscience comes in. So the last step of that is talk about it with God. Have that meeting in that sacred space. You've gone through, you've done the work, and discern. Go through this. Your conscience should lead you if you've taken the time to form and inform it. I hope that helps.
There seems to be little separation of church and state in Catholic social teaching. Why does the church, parish, diocese, pope feel the need to get involved in politics? Shouldn't they be more worried about saving souls?
So I want to go back to the very first thing that I read, and it comes from the U.S. bishops in Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. In the Catholic tradition, responsible citizenship is a virtue, and participation in political life is a moral obligation. Tom took some time to really talk to us about what is morality, what are those moral issues and all that. The church has an obligation. And the church is not just the hierarchy, and it's not just the building. The church is all of us. We have an obligation, a moral obligation, to make sure that we are pursuing the common good. Because in pursuing the common good, in respecting the life and dignity of all, that is about building the kingdom. That is about the salvation story. So when we look at our priests who stand up in the pulpit and don't talk about a partisan candidate, but talk about an issue, and they interweave the values of our Catholic faith into that issue, and people say, you're being too political, I challenge you to stop for just a minute and ask yourself, do you think they're being too political because you aren't where they are on the issue? Because that's okay if you're not there. We're all at different points in our journey. But if you're not where they are, this is an opportunity for you to learn more and discern. And after going through that discernment, you may or may not agree with your pastor or the Pope. And that's also okay. But it is the opportunity for us to learn. It's an opportunity for us to take information from the magisterium, from the learned scholars, and apply it into our daily lives. The church, the Pope, stands for the ideal. We live in the reality. So we must make sure that we are talking about those moral ideals and applying them to our lived reality. That's why the church has to be involved in social issues, and social issues are almost always political issues.
Where does the national defense and expenditures for the national defense fit into the Catholic scheme of a voter balance? These can be good and also evil in the way that the U.S. exercises the national defense. Can you offer ideas on how to weigh the concept of national defense in a voter's paradigm?
Wow, such simple questions. Couldn't you have all given me some hard ones? When it comes to things like national defense, this is one of those things that we have to look at economic justice, okay? It isn't just about the state's ability to protect and take care of us. It's also about the state's ability to make sure that what we are doing with our money is for the best and for the common good. In terms of what is being done in national defense, there is a difference in the spending issue and what we do as national defense in the global arena. Two different things. There's a spending issue, but there's also an action issue, an activity issue. So this question seemed to maybe focus a little bit more on the spending issue, which I would tell you that, again, we could take a whole course on economic justice for all. But what we need to look at when we look at national defense spending, what is the money being used for? Is it being used to defend human dignity and human life, or is it being used to take? Is the money being used to protect the freedoms and the things that we need to make sure that we are all able to live up to our potential? Or is it stopping somebody from being able to live to their potential? So when you're looking at where somebody stands on national defense spending, ask what the money spent is doing. How is it working to support our values, and how is it working to support human dignity? I'm sure there's a lot more I could say on that, but I'll pass it on to the next question.
So this questioner started out by saying, "Kat, thank you." And it continues. I have been damned for 45 years from popes through laity by the way I vote. Women who need help not to abort their child can't find the many services needed to birth a child, health care or child care. Employment at $20 an hour, transportation, affordable housing, mentoring, love, yet the so-called, many of our pro-life people turn their back on the poor. Would you share your thoughts on that statement?
So let me start again by remember people have different passions. I am thankful that there are pro-life people that show up every day, day in and day out, to fight for the unborn. But I am also thankful that there are people that show up day in and day out to fight for the migrant, to fight for the children, to make sure that they have education and health care and a roof over their heads. I'm thankful for the people that show up and fight to make sure that this country is safe for us to live in. So I try to be very careful in putting people into categories, because you started that with the Pope has really said, I haven't voted right in all these years. And it's one of the things that I try to teach, that let's not lump everybody into categories, first of all. The way you vote, again, is that personal, conscious vote that you make. And just because you and the Pope don't agree doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make him right. It doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make him wrong. We're at different places in the journey. The other thing that I want to say on that is that the first question the question that we got that said, where's the church? Why is the church involved in the political, issues? Why can't they look at saving souls? Well, if saving souls is dependent on making sure that those souls are here to save, that starts with the unborn in the womb. It continues with the newborn and making sure that they're cared for. It goes on into our young people and making sure that they have access to education. It goes on to making sure that people have access to jobs, because we know that we are co-creators with God. We are called to work, and work is good, and we all should have the opportunity to work. So all of these things mean, and then I'll even go further and talk about our elderly when we're talking about euthanasia and all of that. So at every step along life, from conception to natural death, we have to make sure that the social issues out there that may be coming against us are addressed. And while some popes focus on one, and some popes focus on another, and some of us focus on those, some here locally, some nationally, some internationally, thank goodness for all of those people. But we also have to remember that all of those issues are important, and you have to keep informing your conscience and feel strongly enough, feel that you have that relationship with God in that sacred place of your conscience, that it doesn't matter. You're going to do what you're called to do, and thank God others are going to do what they're called to do. And if we're all doing and following the values of our Catholic faith and not the platform of a party, then we're doing the right thing.
I'm going to ask the speakers to, each of them, to come back to the podium. And Kat, since you're the closest, you'd be the first. And give us a short closing statement, that takeaway statement that you'd like the audience there and here to have?
So I'm going to quote from the USCCB's Civilize It campaign. With another election cycle in full swing, we're faced with the difficult question of what it means to love our neighbors in the midst of such a divisive climate. We are called to bring the best of ourselves and our faith to the public square. And yet today, many shy away from such involvement because our national and local conversations are filled with anger and harsh language, often directed at people themselves. When personal attacks replace honest debate, no one wins. This kind of attack, no matter the reason, only serves to further divide our communities. As Catholics, we have to model a better way. We will never all agree. We must, as Catholics, pledge to recognize the human dignity of those with whom we disagree, treat others with respect, and rise above the attacks when they're pointed at me.
Thank you, Kat. Tom, can you concisely make a short statement?
Chris has a good sense of humor. Love you all out there. I love everybody. It's good to be here. Thanks for coming. I do want to say that. Just a reminder, when we hear Catholic social teaching, the popes aren't writing it to the United States. They're writing it to the whole world. And so if you can infuse these ideals into the fabric of the whole world, there can be transformation. Now, there's some bad actors in the world. And Pope Francis has an interesting way of looking at that I wanted to share. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to, Pope Francis. He says this: we are called to love everyone without exception. At the same time, loving an oppressor does not mean allowing him to keep oppressing us or letting him think that what he does is acceptable. On the contrary, true love for an oppressor means seeking ways to make him cease his oppression. It means stripping him of power that he does not know how to use, and that diminishes his own humanity and that of others. Forgiveness does not entail allowing oppressors to keep trampling on their own dignity and that of others, or letting criminals continue their wrongdoing. Those who suffer injustice have to defend strenuously their own rights and those of their family, precisely because they must preserve the dignity that they have received as a loving gift from God. So there again, all liberation is mutual liberation. Sometimes we don't think about that. I have a brother that was mentally ill, and there was a time he was dangerous to himself and society. So we had to put him in a state hospital. Well, that's a hard thing to do, but it was for the benefit of him, and it was for the benefit of others. It was the most loving thing that could be done, the most heartbreaking thing to ever have to do. And let me close with this. When he died, my daddy said, boy, sometimes he called me son when he's let me know he was a dad. He said, if there's a saint in our family, it's him. You look at what he went through, what he had to struggle through. That's the saint in the family. And that's also what Francis comes to understand when he kisses the leper. So God bless you. Keep the peace. And the Braves won today, by the way. Yeah. I think I'm taking your stuff.
Okay, let's once again give it up for our speakers. They've put in a lot of time. Okay, I have a couple announcements, and then we'll have our closing prayer from our pastor. Our next Catholic social teaching event will be quite different than this one. The format's going to be different. We're going to go virtual. We're going to do a Zoom, Catholic social teaching. The topic is going to be systemic racism. And the discussion leader is Mr. Ashley Morris, who is the Associate Director of Intercultural Ministries of the Archdiocese of Atlanta. He will look closely at the church and how she defines various forms of racism, ideas of what we should do if we are confronted with acts of racism will also be discussed. Please mark your calendars, both here and those that are listening to us remotely. Feedback. Feedback is extremely important to this ministry. I know we touch on topics that sometimes are a little edgy, but we do that because prior meetings, we've gotten feedback that from people like yourself sitting in the attendance, that they want to hear talks on this topic or that topic. So I would encourage you to please provide us feedback. There's two ways you can do it. You can get an index card and write your feedback. I'd like to know what you thought of tonight's session, the goods and the bad aspects of it. And if you go home and if you say, gee, I wish I would have said this, send us an email. We have a special email for feedback, cst@transfiguration.com, and we'll get that feedback. For those of you here in the sanctuary, when we do close out, please maintain social distancing as you leave the sanctuary. Father Fernando Molina Restrepo, would you be so kind as to give us a closing prayer and your blessing?
Thank you for participating tonight, both you who are here and those who are joining us through internet. We are going to do a little prayer of petition, and then we will end with the Our Father. We will pray it all together. So let's begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we come together asking for your wisdom. Guide us in understanding how to be faithful citizens in our community. Let the gospel message speak to our hearts. We ask for eyes that allow us to see each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. Help us treat all people with dignity, especially those who are victims of abuse, violence, poverty, and discrimination. We ask for ears that will hear the cries of the unborn, the abandoned, and the forgotten. Help us act with mercy at all times. We ask for mouths that proclaim your word, not selfishness or hatred. Help us to live as your disciples in word and deed. We pray for discernment so that we may choose leaders who care for all God's creation. May they be blessed with loving hearts and the strength to move the mountains of injustice, inequality, and other forms of oppression. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and through the Holy Spirit. Amen. And now we pray in the words that Jesus gave us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Oh, you cut me. Let us go in peace.